Neutral space, apparently, had been decorated by someone with delusions of grandeur and a disturbing fondness for crystal formations. Station Omega-7 hung in the void between star systems like a monument to diplomatic overcompensation, its gleaming spires and impossible geometry suggesting that whoever designed it had never met a subtle architectural choice they couldn't completely ignore. The conference chamber at its heart resembled less a meeting room and more a cathedral dedicated to the worship of really important conversations. Which, considering the assembled delegates, might have been appropriate. The Galactic Union had outdone themselves this time. Representatives from 47 different species filled the tiered seating, each delegation more magnificently robed and philosophically inclined than the last. The Etherian ambassador floated in what appeared to be a meditation pose, their translucent form shimmering with inner light that probably meant something deeply spiritual. The crystalline collective's speaker resonated at frequencies that supposedly conveyed emotional harmony, though the sound mostly reminded everyone present of a particularly pretentious wind chime. Near the center, the Verdanian delegate's living tree ship had grown actual branches through the station's hull, because apparently even their transportation needed to make a statement about unity with nature. And there, in the middle of this cosmic circus, sat Admiral Elena Hartwell of the Terran fleet. She looked, to put it charitably, unimpressed. Her uniform bore the kind of wear that came from actual service rather than ceremonial duties, and her expression suggested someone who had attended far too many meetings that could have been solved with a strongly worded email. While the other delegates arranged themselves in poses of contemplative wisdom, she sat in her chair like someone waiting for a bus that was already 20 minutes late. "Beings of the Union," intoned the Etherian High Mediator, their voice carrying that particular quality that came from believing your species had achieved enlightenment roughly 6,000 years ago. "We gather in this sacred space to address the growing shadow of the hegemony collect." Admiral Hartwell's datapad chirped softly. She glanced at it with the kind of attention usually reserved for actually important information. "For too long," the mediator continued, apparently mistaking polite silence for rapt attention, "this rogue faction has spread their philosophy of conquest through brute force, enslaving systems through crude displays of military might. Their methods are antithetical to everything our union represents." A murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber, accompanied by various species equivalent of nodding. The Pulsarians emitted synchronized color change. The harmonic convergence representatives hummed in what was probably meant to be approval but sounded more like a broken air conditioning unit. "We have reached the limits of our traditional approaches," the mediator announced with the kind of dramatic pause that suggested they'd practiced this speech. "Diplomatic outreach has failed. Economic sanctions have proven insufficient. Even our most advanced psychological warfare techniques have barely slowed their advance." Admiral Hartwell looked up from her datapad. For the first time since the session began, she appeared to be paying attention. "It is time," the mediator declared, spreading their arms in a gesture that encompassed the entire assembly, "to invite our newest potential allies to join us in what we call the great work of compassionate liberation." Several delegates turned to look at the human representative. She met their gaze with the expression of someone who suspected she was about to hear something spectacularly stupid. "The humans," continued another speaker, this one from the Zenithran Enlightenment sphere, their voice carrying tones of benevolent condescension, "have shown remarkable military capabilities in their recent encounters. However, their methods lack the refined philosophical framework that true victory requires." The Admiral's stylus stopped moving across her datapad. "What we propose," the Zenithran continued, warming to their theme, "is a collaboration. Human tactical efficiency combined with our spiritual guidance. Raw force tempered by enlightened compassion. Together, we can achieve what neither approach could accomplish alone." The chamber filled with that particular kind of silence that followed pronouncements of cosmic significance. Delegates exchanged meaningful looks that conveyed their shared understanding of the profound wisdom just dispensed. Finally, the Etherian ambassador drifted forward, their form pulsing with what was probably meant to be inspiring light. "You see, Admiral," they said, their voice carrying the patient tone of someone explaining basic mathematics to a particularly slow child, "this is why your species' methods, while impressive, ultimately fall short of true victory." They paused, allowing their words to sink in with appropriate gravity. "You simply can't win an intergalactic conflict without compassion." Admiral Elena Hartwell looked up from her data. She studied the assembled representatives, with the kind of careful attention usually reserved for particularly interesting specimens. The silence stretched, filled with the weight of cosmic wisdom and the gentle hum of the station's life support system. Then, slowly, deliberately, she raised one eyebrow. Somehow that single gesture managed to convey more skepticism than a full dissertation on the subject. The eyebrow had achieved what most diplomatic protests failed to accomplish in years of negotiation. It had created genuine uncertainty among beings who considered themselves the pinnacle of evolved consciousness. The Etherian ambassador's luminous form flickered slightly, like a bulb with loose wiring, while several other delegates shifted in whatever passed for uncomfortable positions among their respective anatomies. Perhaps, ventured the crystalline collective's resonator, their harmonic frequencies taking on a decidedly defensive tone, the Admiral would benefit from understanding our methodologies before dismissing them. Admiral Hartwell's expression suggested she found this about as likely as finding a unicorn running a tax preparation service. But she gestured for them to continue. Her stylus remained poised over the datapad, though whether for note-taking or doodling remained diplomatically ambiguous. The Zenithran delegate rose with the fluid grace of someone who had spent considerable time perfecting their movements for maximum philosophical impact. Our approach to conflict resolution stems from millennia of spiritual evolution, they began, their voice carrying undertones that probably meant something profound to someone somewhere. We do not simply wage war, we perform the great harmonization. The what now? Admiral Hartwell's voice carried the flat tone of someone who had just heard their teenager explain why they needed money for a study group. Combat through empathic resonance, explained the Verdanian representative, their tree branches rustling with what might have been excitement or just space wind. We project understanding into our opponent's consciousness, helping them realize the futility of their aggressive impulses. Admiral Hartwell blinked slowly. You talk them to death. We guide them to enlightenment, corrected the Pulsarian speaker, their skin cycling through colors that definitely meant something important in whatever emotional spectrum they operated on. Through synchronized meditation warfare, we elevate both ourselves and our enemies to higher planes of existence. The human leaned back in her chair with the expression of someone watching a traffic accident in slow motion. And how's that working out for you? This question seemed to catch several delegates off guard, as if the concept of measuring results had never occurred to them. The Etherian High Mediators stepped forward, their ancient wisdom apparently including advanced techniques for avoiding uncomfortable questions. Our methods prioritize long-term spiritual victory over short-term material gains, they intoned. The hegemony's recent expansion into the Outer Rim territories represents merely a temporary setback in the greater cosmic balance. Admiral Hartwell's stylus stopped moving. Temporary set. They've conquered 14 systems in the past year. But at what cost to their spiritual development? Countered the harmonic convergence representative, their voice carrying the kind of concern usually reserved for discussing someone's poor life choices. Every act of aggression distances them further from true enlightenment. I'm sure that's very comforting to the 14 billion beings now under hegemony rule. The Admiral observed, her tone suggesting it was anything but comforting to her. The Etherian ambassador drifted closer, their form pulsing with what was probably meant to be patient wisdom. This is precisely why your species requires our guidance. Human military doctrine focuses solely on immediate tactical victories, while ignoring the deeper implications of cosmic karma. Admiral Hartwell looked up from her datapad with the expression of someone who had just been told that water flows uphill. Cosmic karma. The universe maintains perfect balance, explained the crystalline collective, their resonance taking on educational tones. Every act of violence creates spiritual debt that must eventually be repaid. The hegemony's current success is merely the universe allowing them to accumulate maximum karmic liability before the inevitable correction. How very convenient, murmured the Admiral. The Verdanian delegate's branches swayed with enthusiasm. Our last engagement with the hegemony exemplifies this philosophy. Instead of crude bombardment, we surrounded their fleet with harmonic frequencies designed to inspire introspection about their life choices. Admiral Hartwell's pen clicked against her teeth. The meditation siege lasted only 18 months. The Verdanian announced with obvious pride. By the end, several hegemony vessels had actually achieved preliminary stages of emotional awakening. Before they retreated with 3 captured systems and a supply convoy, added the Admiral, consulting her datapad. The chamber fell silent except for the gentle humming of various life support systems, and what might have been the sound of cosmic wisdom deflating slightly. Material losses are temporary, the Etherian mediator insisted, though their voice carried a slight defensive edge. Spiritual advancement is eternal. Admiral Hartwell nodded thoughtfully, the kind of nod that suggested she was processing information and finding it every bit as useful as a chocolate teapot. Tell me about your battle meditation protocol. This seemed to perk up several delegates, who launched into enthusiastic assimilations of their various consciousness-expanding combat techniques. The Pulsarians described their synchronized color healing formation. The harmonic convergence detailed their battle chants designed to raise both armies to higher vibrational frequencies. The crystallines explained their resonance chambers that could allegedly convince enemy ships to reconsider their aggressive intention. Admiral Hartwell listened with the expression of someone attending a lecture on advanced finger painting techniques from people who insisted it was actually quantum physics. Our most recent innovation, announced the Zenithran delegate with obvious pride, involves projecting holographic mandalas directly into enemy weapon systems. The sacred geometry disrupts their aggressive neural pathways while simultaneously offering them opportunities for personal growth. Fascinating, the Admiral said, in the same tone most people used when discussing particularly uninteresting weather patterns. And your casualty rates? Another uncomfortable silence descended over the chamber. The various delegates exchanged glances that suggested this was not their favorite topic of conversation. Enlightenment requires sacrifice, the Etherian ambassador finally offered. Admiral Hartwell's second eyebrow joined the first in what was becoming a masterclass in nonverbal skepticism. Perhaps, suggested the Etherian mediator, clearly eager to change subjects, the Admiral would share humanity's contribution to our great work of compassionate liberation. The human set down her stylus and looked around the chamber with the careful attention of someone studying an interesting but ultimately doomed experiment. Actually, she said, I have a question first. The question hung in the chamber's artificially recycled atmosphere like an unexploded ordnance, which, considering Admiral Hartwell's expression, might have been an appropriate metaphor. The assembled delegates shifted with the kind of nervous energy typically associated with students who hadn't done their homework, being called upon by a particularly unsympathetic teacher. My question, the Admiral continued, her voice carrying the deceptive calm of someone about to deliver what military personnel called a learning experience, is about your success rate. The Etherian mediator's ancient features arranged themselves into what might have been confusion, if ancient cosmic wisdom was capable of such mundane emotions. Success rate, yes. Results, outcomes. The thing that happens after all the meditation and harmonic frequencies and sacred geometry. Admiral Hartwell consulted her datapad with the casual efficiency of someone reading a grocery list. According to Galactic Union records, your last 15 compassionate interventions resulted in an average territorial loss of 2.3 systems per engagement, with casualty rates running approximately 400% higher than conventional military doctrine would predict. The chamber's temperature seemed to drop several degrees, though this might have been the life support systems finally giving up on maintaining a comfortable environment for this level of cosmic awkwardness. Those statistics, the Etherian ambassador flickered diplomatically, fail to account for the immeasurable spiritual victories achieved. They account, Admiral Hartwell interrupted with the precision of a scalpel, for the fact that you've been losing consistently for the past 60 years. The crystalline collective's resonance took on distinctly defensive harmonics. Military victories are hollow without moral. Moral what? The Admiral's voice carried the kind of patience that wasn't really patience at all. The moral victory of letting the hegemony enslave entire species while you meditate about it. The spiritual advancement of watching them strip mine inhabited worlds because stopping them might interfere with your cosmic karma. Several delegates began speaking at once, their voices creating a cacophony of offended wisdom that sounded remarkably like a broken elevator full of very important birds. Admiral Hartwell waited for the noise to subside with the expression of someone who had extensive experience letting people dig their own graves. Perhaps, she continued when relative quiet returned, you'd like to hear about humanity's recent encounters with hegemony force. The Verdanian delegate's branches rustled with what might have been interest or possibly just anxiety. Your species' aggressive tendencies are well documented. 3 weeks ago, Admiral Hartwell said, consulting her datapad again, a hegemony scouting fleet entered the Proxima system. 12 heavy cruisers, escort frigates, and what our intelligence services identified as a planetary bombardment platform. The chamber fell silent. Even the life support systems seemed to be holding their breath. They sent the usual demands: surrender or face extinction, complete submission to hegemony authority, standard intimidation protocol designed to terrify primitive species into compliance. The Admiral's stylus tapped against her teeth in a rhythm that suggested she found this memory mildly amusing. Unfortunately for them, humans have a tendency to respond poorly to threats. Surely, ventured the Pulsarian representative, their skin cycling through colors that probably indicated hope. Your species attempted diplomatic contact first, some form of peaceful resolution. Admiral Hartwell's smile could have been used to etch glass. We did. We sent them a message. The assembled delegates leaned forward with the kind of anticipation usually reserved for the revelation of profound cosmic secrets. We told them to leave. The silence that followed suggested that several species' concepts of diplomatic complexity had just suffered traumatic injury. And, prompted the harmonic convergence speaker, they didn't. Admiral Hartwell's finger moved across her datapad screen. So we made them. The Etherian mediator's expression suggested they were beginning to suspect this story wouldn't end with everyone sitting in a circle sharing feelings. Through what method? The traditional human approach to pest control. The Admiral looked up from her datapad with the expression of someone sharing a particularly satisfying recipe. We shot them. The chamber erupted in a chorus of shocked harmonics, color changes, and what the crystalline collective probably considered the resonant equivalent of faint. Several delegates appeared to be experiencing the philosophical equivalent of system shock. You simply destroyed them. The Etherian ambassador's form flickered with what might have been horror or possibly just really advanced confusion. Not all of them, Admiral Hartwell clarified with the tone of someone being scrupulously fair. We left one ship intact to carry our message back to Hegemony Command. What message? Asked the Zenithran delegate. Though their voice suggested they weren't entirely sure they wanted to know. Admiral Hartwell's smile widened slightly. That humans consider unprovoked aggression against our colonies to be what we technically classify as a really bad idea. The Verdanian representative's branches drooped with what was unmistakably distress. But the karmic implications were apparently less important to us than the practical implications of letting armed hostiles threaten civilian populations. The Admiral's voice carried the kind of finality usually associated with closing argument. The engagement lasted approximately 14 minutes. 0 human casualties. Hegemony losses included 11 heavy cruisers, 16 escort frigates, and 1 very confused bombardment platform crew, who spent their final moments wondering why their shields weren't working. This is exactly the kind of thinking that perpetuates the cycle of violence. The harmonic convergence representative's voice reached frequencies that probably violated several noise ordinances. Your species learns nothing from cosmic wisdom. Admiral Hartwell nodded thoughtfully. You're absolutely right. We learned nothing from cosmic wisdom. She paused, consulting her datapad again. However, we did learn something from the hegemony's computer system. This statement seemed to catch everyone off guard, as if the concept of gathering intelligence from defeated enemies was some sort of novel tactical innovation. Their strategic database was quite informative. The Admiral continued conversational, detailed records of their expansion plans, military capabilities, and what they rather charmingly refer to as pacification protocols for conquered species. The chamber's temperature seemed to drop another few degrees as the implications of actual intelligence gathering sank in among beings who preferred to approach conflict through interpretive dance and positive thinking. According to their own records, Admiral Hartwell, her voice taking on the tone of someone delivering a weather report about incoming hurricane. The hegemony has been systematically targeting Galactic Union territories specifically because your compassionate warfare has convinced them that your species lacked the will to offer effective resistance. The silence that followed was the kind typically associated with the moment when gravity explains to someone exactly why their brilliant plan to fly by flapping really hard was doomed from the start. They have detailed psychological profiles. The Admiral continued helpfully, describing each member's species' preference for prolonged negotiation over decisive action. They've calculated the exact amount of time your meditation-based responses provide them to consolidate captured territory. Several delegates appeared to be reconsidering fundamental aspects of their worldview, which was probably good for them but definitely uncomfortable to watch. In essence, Admiral Hartwell concluded, setting her datapad aside with the satisfaction of someone who had just finished explaining basic mathematics to a room full of people who had been insisting that 2 plus 2 equaled enlightenment. Your compassionate approach to warfare has been the hegemony's greatest strategic asset. The chamber fell silent except for the sound of cosmic wisdom slowly deflating like a punctured balloon filled with very expensive gas. The deflation of cosmic wisdom, it turned out, made a sound remarkably similar to the air conditioning system giving up on life. Admiral Hartwell watched the assembled delegates process their new understanding of reality with the expression of someone observing a particularly educational natural disaster. Several species appeared to be experiencing what could charitably be called philosophical system failure. The Etherian mediator was the first to attempt damage control, their ancient features arranging themselves into what might have been dignity salvage mode. Surely the Admiral understands that temporary tactical setbacks do not invalidate millennia of spiritual evolution. Temporary. Admiral Hartwell's voice carried the kind of amusement typically associated with watching someone insist that gravity was just a suggestion. You've been losing territory consistently for 6 decades. At your current rate of spiritual advancement, the hegemony will control the entire Union within another 20 years. The crystalline collective's resonance took on frequencies that probably meant something profound in whatever emotional spectrum they operated on, but mostly sounded like a wine glass arguing with a cheese grater. The mathematical perspective fails to account for the deeper cosmic implications. The mathematical perspective, Admiral Hartwell interrupted with surgical precision, accounts for the fact that your deeper cosmic implications have gotten approximately 47 billion beings enslaved, strip-mined, or converted into what the hegemony charmingly refers to as biological resource. The chamber's artificial atmosphere seemed to thicken with the weight of uncomfortable truths, though this might have been the life support systems finally achieving some form of mechanical enlightenment and deciding to quit. Perhaps, ventured the Verdanian delegate, their branches rustling with the kind of hope usually associated with someone suggesting that maybe the fire was just being misunderstood. Our approaches could be synthesized, human tactical efficiency guided by our spiritual wisdom. Admiral Hartwell looked at them with the expression of someone who had just been offered a sandwich made of good intentions and cosmic understanding. You want to guide us. The universe requires balance, explained the Etherian ambassador, their form pulsing with what was probably meant to be inspirational light, but mostly looked like a malfunctioning navigation beacon. Human aggression tempered by enlightened compassion could achieve what neither approach accomplishes alone. The Admiral's stylus resumed its rhythmic tapping against her teeth, creating a sound that somehow managed to convey more skepticism than a full library of philosophy textbooks written by particularly cynical librarians. Let me see if I understand correctly, she said, her voice carrying the deceptive calm of someone approaching the punchline of a very long joke. You want humanity to adopt your method, the same methods that have resulted in 6 decades of consistent territorial losses, casualty rates that would make a medieval plague doctor weep, and a strategic doctrine so ineffective that your enemies have started using it as a planning tool. The silence that followed suggested that several cosmic worldviews were currently experiencing what technical support would classify as critical system errors. But Admiral Hartwell continued, consulting her datapad with the casual efficiency of someone reading a restaurant menu. I have a counteroffer. The assembled delegates perked up with the kind of desperate hope typically associated with people discovering that their parachute might not be completely broken after all. Based on our analysis of the captured hegemony data, the Admiral, her voice taking on the tone of someone sharing particularly interesting weather patterns, Their primary fleet concentration is currently massed in the Outer Rim, preparing for what their strategic documents refer to as Final Pacification Protocol. Several delegates began to speak at once, but Admiral Hartwell continued with the unstoppable momentum of someone who had clearly thought this through. Their intelligence indicates they expect your standard response. Approximately 6 months of diplomatic outreach, followed by another year of harmonic meditation protocols, during which time they'll complete their consolidation of captured territories and prepare for the next expansion phase. The Pulsarian representative's skin cycled through colors that probably indicated growing alarm, though it might also have been a reaction to the chamber's increasingly questionable air quality. However, Admiral Hartwell said, and her smile could have been used to explain the concept of predatory satisfaction to alien anthropologists. They're operating under some outdated assumptions about Union military doctrine. The harmonic convergence speaker's voice reached frequencies that violated several noise ordinances and possibly some laws of physics. What are you suggesting? Admiral Hartwell set her data pad aside and looked around the chamber with the expression of someone about to explain exactly why the House always wins. I'm suggesting that humanity handle the hegemony problem. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of shocked harmonics, color changes, and what the crystalline collective probably considered the resonant equivalent of having a philosophical heart attack. Handle them. The Zenithran delegate managed to ask through what appeared to be severe cosmic cognitive dissonance. The traditional human approach to problems that won't go away, Admiral Hartwell said cheerfully. We eliminate. The Etherian ambassador's form flickered with what might have been horror or possibly just really advanced disbelief. You cannot simply destroy an entire military alliance. We absolutely can. Admiral Hartwell corrected with the tone of someone explaining basic physics to someone who had been insisting that rocks fell upward. The question is whether you want us to do it with or without your input. This statement seemed to cause several delegates to experience what could charitably be called existential system overload. The Verdanian representative's branches drooped so severely they appeared to be attempting some form of botanical suicide. But the cosmic balance, began the Etherian mediator, will be perfectly balanced, Admiral Hartwell assured them, once the hegemony stops existing as a functional military threat. The silence that followed was the kind typically associated with moments when the universe decides to demonstrate exactly why overcomplicating simple problems is generally a bad idea. The Terran fleet, Admiral Hartwell continued conversationally, has been tracking hegemony movements for the past 18 months. We know their fleet positions, supply lines, command structures, and what they eat for breakfast. Our strategic assessment indicates that a coordinated strike could eliminate their military capacity within approximately 3 weeks. Several delegates appeared to be experiencing what military medical personnel would classify as reality-induced trauma. 3, whispered the harmonic convergence representative. Give or take a few days for paperwork. Admiral Hartwell confirmed. We'll need to file some reports afterward. Bureaucracy, you understand. The chamber fell silent except for the gentle humming of life support systems and what might have been the sound of several thousand years of accumulated cosmic wisdom quietly packing its bags and heading for the exit. Admiral Hartwell looked around at the assembled delegates, with the expression of someone who had just finished explaining why their really complicated solution to a simple problem was both unnecessary and counterproductive. So she said, picking up her data pad again, shall we discuss the details, or would you prefer to meditate about it for another 60 years? The Etherian mediator's ancient features arranged themselves into what might have been resigned acceptance. If ancient cosmic wisdom was capable of acknowledging when it had been thoroughly outmaneuvered by someone who actually knew how to win wars, and somewhere in the depths of space, the universe itself seemed to chuckle at the irony of beings who had spent millennia learning about compassion being taught about effectiveness by a species that had figured out both.